Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Hazardous Webinar series, where we take a closer look at one of Natural Hazard Research Australia's research projects, its findings, and how it'll be translated into practice by those who'll use the research. My name's Nicole Moore, and I'm one of the Node Research Managers with the Centre, and I'm based in our Brisbane office. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all gathered from across a range of different Aboriginal lands today, and I'm a guest here on the Yuggera Turrbal lands in Meanjin in Brisbane, as I am wherever I walk in Australia, because sovereignty has never been ceded. I pay my respects to the Yuggera and Turrbal elders, past, present and emerging, and also to any First Nations people joining us online today. These lands and waters across our country have always been places of teaching, research and learning. First Nations people have long looked after and cared for country as kin and continue to do so today, and we can all play a role in dismantling the ongoing processes of colonisation by supporting Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people on this journey. After all, we all share the same fundamental goal, and that is resilient and sustainable landscapes and communities, and everything in between. So thank you all for joining us today. Today's panel session will be recorded, and a link to it and any presentation materials will be made available in the coming weeks. Please let us know if you have any technical problems during the session by adding the details into the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of the screen, and our team will help troubleshoot any issues with you. The questions will be answered at the end of the formal panel presentations, so please add your questions into the Q&A function and make sure you specify who your question is for, and we'll get to them in the last 15 minutes. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel members today. Dr. Julian Marks is a lecturer in the School of Computing and Information Systems. He holds a PhD from the University of Duisburg-Essen, Germany, where he began researching social media crisis communications. And his work combines computational and qualitative methods to explore how individuals and organisations use social media to navigate crises such as natural hazards. Among other case studies, he's investigated Hurricane Harvey, the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires, and most recently, Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Mark Ryan is the General Manager of Disaster and Emergency Management and the Local Disaster Coordinator for the City of Gold Coast. Mark played a key role in the release of public information and warnings to the community during TC Alfred. And Mark has operational experience across 3 states and territories, holding senior roles in various fire and emergency services, local council and state government agencies. Mark led the 2014 State Emergency Service response to the Brisbane hailstorms and the G20 World Leaders Meeting. He's been a State Duty Commander with the South Australian Country Fire Service and led the response to the 2023 Christmas night Gold Coast storms and 2024 New Year's Day flooding, as well as preparation for response to and early relief of Tropical Cyclone Alfred in 2025. Mark has been awarded the National Medal and various other medals and citations for his work. We're very, very pleased to have Mark with us today. Sian Duplessis Grimson. Sian is an emergency management coordinator with Queensland Police Service and played a key role with Mark in developing communication strategies for community public information and warnings during TC Alfred. Sian delivers warnings and alerts training in Queensland and contributed to the redevelopment of the Queensland Warning Manual and supports agencies to pre-prepare public messaging. During the 2025 Northern and Western Queensland floods and Tropical Cyclone Alfred, Sian assisted 8 councils across the state to produce over 60 warnings and public information products during disaster operations. And her work helps ensure Queenslanders receive timely, accurate and trusted messaging during disasters. Penny Dahl. Penny is the manager, the All Hazards Crisis Capability in the Department of the Premier and Cabinet. Penny's a highly motivated leader in media, communications and disaster management with demonstrated experience, providing executive level guidance in engagement strategies, exercise development and expansion, crisis communication, issues management, and current affairs. Penny's background includes an extensive range of fieldwork, not only as a manager in crisis communications, but also as a key advisor to Queensland's central agency during a disaster. She's a former recognised broadcast journalist in both radio and television news. And we're also joined by Chrissy McLeod. Chrissy's a senior media and public affairs advisor with Queensland Police Service. And Chrissy has 2 decades of media and public affairs experience with Queensland Police Service in critical incidents, including Cyclone Yasi, the 2011 floods, COVID-19 and TC Jasper. So that's our panel for today, and we'll hear presentations from all of them. But many of you working in the sector on public information and warnings, you're using social media within this function, and you'd be well aware of how this plays out in real time, with many, many official and unofficial pages and groups ramping up in the provision of information intended to inform and prepare communities for such hazards. TC Alfred provided the opportunity for a research project to explore how communities use social media during the event and what we can learn from this to improve preparedness, communications and recovery. This project was initiated through the Centre's Responsive Disaster Research Program, where the Centre engages actively with our formal participant agencies to develop research needed in the wake of a disaster. And the findings definitely have relevance to all stakeholders involved in public information and warnings across all jurisdictions in Australia and beyond. We wanted to use today's webinar to not only share this research with you, but also for the key Queensland agency representatives to reflect on how their locally led disaster management arrangements play out when it comes to public information and warnings in response to a hazard such as TC Alfred, inviting them to share their experiences during this event and to talk to the value of this research for their social media strategies, policies and practice. So let's get going, and I'll hand you over to Dr. Julian Marks to share his presentation on the research and its findings. Over to you, Julian.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you for the kind introduction and having me today. Thank you once more. Thank you for trusting me with this important research. And I'm speaking to you here alone, but this work would not have been possible without my amazing PhD students, Rashika and Farnas, who also worked with me on the analysis of the data and preparing this presentation. The title of the project is Community Experiences of Tropical Cyclone Alfred, a social media analytics approach. And in a second, I will explain to you a little bit more in detail what I do when I mean I'm approaching a case study like this with a social media analytics approach. But to get things started, I brought you some headlines from the traditional media who back then when the cyclone hit also picked up on the role of social media, which exemplifies how crucial social media was for community experiences and navigating and making sense of the unfolding situations. So we have this headline here: as the Weather Bureau pumps out crucial cyclone information, millions of Australians look elsewhere. And this might have to do with novel phenomena that we see on social media that I'll unpack in this presentation, such as this one presented here by another news article talking about so-called weather influencers, particularly on TikTok in this case, who invent a completely new form of making sense of natural disasters and troubling responders and response agencies in how to deal with that. So at the root of these issues or novel socio-technical phenomena that we observe here during disasters having to do with social media, there are a couple of, I would call them mechanisms, how communities consume content nowadays. And then on the other hand, how agencies sort of use social media to publish warnings, engage with the communities, and so on. So that's what my goal is to unpack these mechanisms for you today. So hopefully you can take something away and spark a discussion among the panel. So first of all, we did a data collection spanning 3 particular social media platforms. Obviously, there are more, and that's actually one of the first sort of findings or epiphanies that I had when researching Alfred. And it was that previously, Nicola mentioned Hurricane Harvey in the US a few years back, and also previous Australian disasters. We had pretty much a different social media landscape. We had platforms like Twitter back then dominating the space a little bit in where attention was going. And nowadays we have multiple platforms sort of spread across communities and demographics. So apart from Instagram, Facebook, and X that you see here on the screen, we have TikTok, we have Reddit, and we have emerging decentralized platforms like Blue Sky that communities begin to use, making it even harder for agencies and responders to be everywhere at once, which is even hard with lots of volunteer work involved and so on. Anyhow, we focused on these 3 platforms and gathered in stage 1 data based on keywords. That is typically something that we do in social media analytics research. And in stage 2, we collected data based on accounts. So we can also gather, for example, the posts of all these accounts that we choose, and then we were particularly interested in the comments in response to these official messages. And the accounts that we looked at, you also see here on the screen, which display many of the agencies, not all, but many that were involved in the disaster response of Cyclone Alfred. So then I'd like to give you a high-level overview of sort of the analysis that we did and some of the findings. So first of all, Nicola also mentioned computational methods in my bio. That's part of my research. Here, one method that we use is topic modeling. You can just imagine this as an algorithm that automatically groups and clusters topics of interest or topics that communities talk about. Here, done with the Instagram data set that we collected. And you can see that general cyclone mentions and safety and official kind of preparedness messages sort of dominate the discourse, but particularly because we are talking about Instagram, also topics that this platform is known for, like pets and surfing and other hobbies play a role, but also small businesses who often are present on Instagram. So that helped us to understand, okay, what do communities actually talk about and what topics do they engage with? We also did a temporal analysis. Here, there's a technique we call temporal bracketing that allows us to map the activity, the engagement over time. And this is an example where we did this with a Facebook group, or actually a Facebook page, the Brisbane Incident Facebook page, which was quite active during the cyclone. And here we can clearly see that main events throughout the event then sparked engagement, which is not that surprising, but it will tell you where, or will tell us where to look at and when sort of the communication was spiking. And then in terms of topics, so going away from sort of the structural elements of the communication networks, we did a bottom-up analysis using qualitative methods and manual coding. So 6 themes emerged from that are not super surprising, but what is surprising is the mechanisms that I teased earlier that lead to how these topics are discussed. And well, I can go into these in detail if you have questions later. But as I said, this is a high-level overview, and we will focus on the mechanisms in this presentation. And then we had some themes that NHRA taught me to look into, which sort of then transitioned into a top-down analysis of these 6 themes. So yeah, particularly we were interested in how our insurance claims, for example, discussed, or financial preparedness of local businesses, how is the extent of damage displayed, and so on. And then we looked into these topics as well. Some of them were discussed quite broadly, and others were not, depending on the platform. So now there we go with the sort of underlying mechanisms that I find interesting in and that I look forward to sharing with you. So we do have the first one, which we respectfully call legacy communications, and just as examples. And I've had this conversation with the Bureau before, so I hope they don't mind having them as an example once more. So these are social media accounts here on Facebook, with really large followings, over 1 million for the Bureau in this case. And official warnings typically look like this. We have a very, very, very dense sort of post, dense in information with static imagery. And this is a typical post of what we mean by legacy communications, or sort of static warnings. This is another one, also static image, and a little bit of text that nowadays in social media is already quite a lot of text for users to engage with. And what these posts typically then entail is comparably little to medium engagement among social media users, and they are medium targeted, which means that users or community members who follow these accounts, they are sort of already quite interested in informing themselves about what's going on. The problem is that algorithms do not like this type of content distribution anymore, also on Facebook. So we see quite low reach of these sort of messages compared to the social graph that you would see. So social graph would mean the number of followers here. So there's a very, very large discrepancy here. The second mechanism that I like to bring your attention to is what we call algorithmic audiencing. And here we do have the opposite. So we do have users and community members with non-existent or very small social graphs who then share mostly short form and very dynamic visual contents, like TikTok style shorts. In this case, these were Instagram videos, who have sort of low information density, but high triggers for users to engage with them. And they are very much not targeted because the algorithm kind of picks the audience based on the engagement that these videos show. And so it is very hard to target specific communities with this type of content, but the reach is extensive, and the reach even goes beyond the region or even Australia in some cases. And then the third mechanism of content distribution and community engagement with social media happens in spaces that we label dark social. So here, everything that has some sort of entry barrier for you as agencies, or even for me as a researcher. Best example are Facebook groups, like you can see here. These spaces are closed and community-led and hyper-localized typically. So not even hyper-localized, but they even have a community-based targeting. So the first example you can see, there's a migrant group plus a regional or local focus combined in one group. So you can't get any better targeting than this. But again, the issue here is, or at least for crisis responders, is that they are dark in a sense that you cannot intrude or see what's going on in these groups unless there is some sort of conversation between administrators, micro-influencers, and community members who are active in these groups. So taking these together, we observed in analyzing the Alfred case study that there's quite a large gap between crisis response that sort of accommodates for these algorithmic changes that we see on social media, with algorithmic audiencing on the one side, and dark social as sort of the place where community members now gather now that, public feeds sort of do not play or present the information to them that they're actually looking for, or that is targeted to them. So yeah, this is the field of tension that we observed, and this requires some action, or it leads into some implications for social media communication strategies. So first, I have the point that it is worthwhile, in my opinion, to explore visual short form content. That doesn't mean that every agency needs to open a TikTok account. Sometimes that's not possible because of intelligence reasons. I learned that before, which is quite interesting, but understanding them. And even though it is not TikTok, the principles that we see playing out on TikTok are also then spilling over to other platforms like Instagram and so on. So understanding how these erratic algorithms work is really, really crucial. Then partnering with trusted community influencers is the second implication. This can be community leaders in local groups. So far in Alfred, what mostly happened was that these community influencers were proactively seeing what was going on and taking the warnings that I've shown you earlier, and then repost them within the group structures. But my suggestion is that we can structure this or make it more systematically by just making this connection between responders and these community leaders, so that there's a structured approach and we don't just rely on the common sense of the community leaders or their proactive behavior to do this and spread the warnings within the groups. Yeah, so then there's this issue: how do we balance these unpredictable algorithms in the public feeds and the restricted dark spaces? So this is something that, yeah, I would like to work on in the future with as many practitioners as possible, and yeah, build trust within these communities and start this conversation. And lastly, for the public side, we've seen in the data that whenever a two-way communication channel was opened, so underneath warning posts, for example, if there were Q&A formats, timely information rather than outdated information, and responses to comments, that then sparked further conversation and helped these warnings also to become more visible. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I'm very happy to respond to any questions, suggestions, and also to hear about the sort of Queensland approach to dealing with these topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. I'm amazed by how much social media has changed over the last 14 years. Showing my age here, I remember being involved in activations over the 2010-2011 flooding event in Queensland. We just evacuated the regional communities of Condamine and St George, and then the inland tsunami hit Toowoomba and then down into the Lockyer Valley. And at that time, Queensland Police Service was building its social media presence. Just prior to that event, our agencies were getting used to using social media, I suppose, at that time. And their Facebook page ended up being a key communication channel for impacted communities, so much so that it became a case study and best practice at the time. And to learn now that the social media systems are now working algorithmically shows how much things have changed over time. So it'll be interesting to see what our other panellists have got to say in terms of their approach to public information and warnings at the most recent event. And I'd like to hand over to Mark Ryan and Sian to talk about how they dealt with public informations and warnings during TC Alfred. Over to you, Mark and Sian.
Thanks very much, Nicola, and good morning, everyone. Sian's just going to give us a bit of an overview from the QPS perspective and the state arrangements, and then we'll delve into a bit of a case study. Thanks, Sian.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Nicola, and thanks to Dr. Julian and the NHRA for this important study that shows us how communities actually engage. So I'll just outline, as Mark said, the Queensland disaster management arrangements and how that approach was used during TC Alfred. So here in Queensland, disaster management is locally led through the local disaster management group. So local governments are primarily responsible for disasters within their local government area. And if the capacity or capability of the local government is exceeded, they can put a request for assistance up to the district, and the district can escalate that to the state. Any resources provided by the state or the district are fed back into that local level, but really importantly, the local level maintains the leadership. So they maintain that decision making, they decide how and where those resources are used, and they still lead the disaster response and the disaster management. So as the lead, local governments are also the issuing agency for cyclone warnings here in Queensland. They decide who, when, and how to warn people, because they know their communities best. So they know the risks they face, they know the communication channels, all of those sorts of things. And so as the lead, local governments are empowered to construct and disseminate warnings themselves and public information, but there is a tiered support model that is there to support them that you can see on the screen there. So the first level is obviously local governments can issue and disseminate independently, but if they do require support, the first level is emergency management coordinators or EMCs like myself, and where there is that support and advice to local governments. If we're not available, so it's 2 a.m. outside of hours, the watch desk at the State Disaster Coordination Centre is a 24/7, 365 capability that can also provide local governments with that support and advice. The third tier there is the Queensland Police Service Public Information Warnings Unit, and they can provide specialist surge capacity back to the EMCs and the watch desk in terms of advice and warnings. So the aim of this model is to provide a safety net. It's not red tape. The EMCs, the watch desk, the Public Information Warnings Unit, none of us have a role in authorising warnings. We just provide advice and support. The local government issue it based on their community and their risk. So what this looks like during Tropical Cyclone Alfred, next slide please, Mark, is that emergency management coordinators embedded themselves across all of the councils in South East Queensland 24/7. So myself was at City of Gold Coast for 3 weeks. It felt a lot longer, but I think it was around that amount of time. We had daily dial-ins between the emergency management coordinators, the local governments, and the state warning capability, just to share what we're doing, discuss our strategy, align our warning strategies. We went into this in South East Queensland very green compared to our far northern colleagues who know how to deal with the cyclone, and this is their bread and butter. So there's a lot of sharing of information just so we're all on the same page. And over that 13-day period, 19 local governments issued a total of 229 warnings that are Australian warning system compliant. And every single one of those was contextualised to the local area and the community by the local government. So some were severe warnings, some were cyclones, some were storm tide, some were flooding, all for the local community. And so while this research looked at a wide range of disaster-related social media and agencies, it didn't actually look at the social media of local governments. So it might not fully reflect how the warnings themselves were issued or received, at least not through those formal council channels. But I don't see this as a limitation, it's a lens. It shows us the noise that local governments are competing with when we are issuing warnings and we're using social media. So knowing that broader social media landscape or ecosystem helps local governments. So when are you timing your warnings, how are you integrating them, what's the best approach to your warnings and your public information? So it's really important through that. And I've seen some of the strategies that were highlighted in the study work really well this year at various events. A good example of this is using that community-driven communication on social media, in the Southeast region for SES had found success with this during TC Alfred. So they use 5 local unit Facebook pages as opposed to one broad one for their messaging. And while the engagement across this looked modest, so the likes and comments are in the tens, not the hundreds and thousands, this was actually a relative increase for them, and it represented a significant increase for those pages and actually triggered a spike in donations and over 300 new volunteer inquiries attributed to social media. So that's a real testament to that community-based hyperlocal approach that Julian has called out in his study. As I said, in my role, I was embedded with City of Gold Coast, and they issued over 32 warnings across the event, but they actually did more than triple that in the associated public information that went with it. And so warnings, just like social media, are only one part of that disaster management comms piece. So I'll hand over to Mark to tell you how Gold Coast brought it all together.
Thank you, Sian, and thank you for your support. As always, it's always really welcome and a great partnership with Queensland Police, so thank you for that. Just wanted to, I guess, to contextualise from a City of Gold Coast perspective, we learned a lot from an event back in 2023 where we had a compounding event. We had a severe wind event come through, officially recorded through our hinterland at about 180 kilometres an hour, unofficial early 200s. That was followed by a 3-day heat wave and then by flooding by New Year's Eve and morning. And what we learned around our digital strategy was give about 12 hours power loss, we start losing our digital reach. So that was, I guess, a learning we took into TC Alfred, and we knew that we would see power loss based on the forecast. So what we did was tried to get information for the event early to our community. So whether it be from storm tide inundation, whether it be from riverine flooding, we went out early to support people making decisions around sandbags, etc. They're flat packs that you can see on the screen, but in the actual event we had an ArcGIS product where they could geolocate themselves, look at their properties, and we updated that with the current bomb information about 6 or 7 times throughout the 3 or 4 days. And then to support that, what we were after was, I guess, a simple comm strategy that was reflected on our socials, it was reflected on our talking heads in mainstream media, and that was we said we'll supply. We spend a lot of our off season right now, in fact, going out and talking with the community and saying our dashboard is where you can do that. Our dashboard sits off network to the council, so we can update it basically immediately. It also is fed from our incident management system within our local disaster coordination centre. If we open an evac centre, 10 seconds later, it's on the public dashboard. So it's all integrated up. So we went out and just said, Google Gold Coast dashboard, hit red to sign up for Gold Coast Alerts, which is our opt-in service. And we saw the subscribers grow from 12,000 to 60,000 in 5 days through that event. And then hit blue button if you want to look at the disaster flood risk map. And our proposition to the community was that we would keep that updated as soon as we could, as we did with our warnings as well. So in the event, what you can sort of start to see now is the power loss played out exactly as it did. We, up until 2023, were sticking with the state messaging around be ready for 3 days without power. Now we've seen 2 events that has seen power loss greater than 6 days, and in some case 9 days in some of our communities. We have 2 levels of resilience in the Gold Coast: west of the M1 motorway, which is our rural community, far more resilient, far more tolerant. Versus east of the M1, the expectation is because we don't have those huge big wind events typically on the coast, the expectation around power loss is a little bit less. So from a public info strategy from the start, from a mainstream media perspective, we had more engagement than we ever had with the media. We've already got really good relationships with them. For example, we gave them unprecedented access in some cases in a controlled manner to our local disaster coordination centre to connect with the community, and we got some really good feedback around that. We did pre-briefings with the journos before that. We made sure that whatever the talking points was in the media releases were the same talking points that the acting mayor was talking to, the same points that we're putting out in social media. And then to talk to that power loss strategy, when we started to see the reach drop because of the power loss issue, we then started standing down non-essential staff from work, and when it was safe, started them door knocking, and we door knocked over 3,000 or 4,000 properties. They had exactly the same info as to what was going on socials. But from a cumulative potential reach, we got close to 99 million through the entire event. The highest day was on the 5th of March, around 20 million reach. We had 11 stand-ups, 3 media opportunities off-site, and it was averaging about 5 to 6 interviews a day with our chair. Our top 4 inquiries by the phone was around sandbag, flooding, property damage, information and disaster. And for our digital, it was around flood maps and preparation for flood. There's some statistics there on the screen. And we'll share them, but rather than take up the time reading them out, what we also did, and to Julian's point, is a couple of things. Is we had a daily briefing with our councillors, so they were on point. they were able to then re-articulate those points that were relevant. So our hinterland community councillor will communicate very different to, say, Palm Beach or Eleonora. They know their communities, but they were then plugging into the community groups and encouraging them just to reshare their posts. So then we had that clarity of message through that. But yeah, we had good growth on social media. We backed it up, as I said, and I think that's probably my biggest lesson and challenge to you all, is to think about what happens on day 3 when you can't issue emergency alerts and you can't issue social media posts. How are you standing that up? In closing, what we're now doing is we're creating community hubs. Our biggest lesson was we actually do want to continue the digital approach. It's timely, it's trusted, where we can make it work. So we're actually currently bringing up a range of community centres with both generation and with Starlink and other resilience, and actually getting the community to come to a hub where we can actually engage, and hopefully engage one-on-one, but they can also then access their socials and other sites in the dashboard. So thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Mark and Sian. That was great. Just wanted to let you all know that we'll also be providing copies of the presentation, as well as the presentation slides, as well as the recordings. So just so that everybody's aware that they'll be made available as well. Really interesting to see how practice is reflecting on the findings from this work as well. So thank you very much, Mark and Sian. I'd like to hand over to Penny and Chrissy to talk about what was happening at the state government level, at the higher level, with Queensland Police and with the Department of Premier and Cabinet. Penny and Chrissy?
Thanks, Nicola. Yes, thanks, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Mark and Sian said about the arrangements in Queensland. It is locally led. We think local governments are best placed to know their local communities. So in terms of crisis or disaster, we tend to push members of the public towards those community dashboards, which have all the relevant information. So just speaking more broadly, I guess, from a state government perspective, once an event reaches a point where there is state government involvement, we have the Crisis Communication Network, which is our strategic framework for engaging all departments across government that may be impacted during an event, and making sure that we're all on the same page during a disaster. And I think as part of that, the other thing I want to acknowledge, that while Tropical Cyclone Alfred received a lot of media attention, a lot of traction on social media, we actually had other events happening at the same time. So prior to Alfred, we had the North Queensland flooding, for which the Crisis Communication Network was activated for. So we were already working on that particular event. And then obviously following TC Alfred, we had the Southwest Queensland floods. And the reason I want to highlight those is that as a government, it's really important we acknowledge what's going on in other areas of the state, and we're not hyper-focused on SEQ. Our resources are going to other places, and we care about what's happening in other parts of the state. So that was, I think, one of the harder things we had to concentrate on with our communication strategy, while we're focused on preparing for TC Alfred, remembering that people have lost their homes up in the north of the state, and that we're preparing for potential further severe weather down in the southwest. The CCN works, as we would call it. So the CCN supports the lead agency, which in Alfred's case was the Queensland Police Service, in ensuring that our whole of Queensland government voice, single point of truth, is in line with one another. Often as government agencies, we operate in silos, and that can result in our comm strategies skewing off in different directions. So the CCN comprises of heads of communications from every government agency, also government-owned corporations like SEQ Water, Powerlink, Energy Queensland, Local Government Association of Queensland. We convene daily, usually, can be more depending on the severity of an incident, and we discuss emerging issues that we're noticing either with social media or traditional media, and we work on whole of government comm strategies to address this. Now, some of the things that feed into this, as Chrissy will discuss, is just that public sentiment analysis, what's being said in community groups, in what areas, and then we can tailor our comms approach into addressing their concerns, whether it be directly or through myth busting. And also the CCN can act as a conduit up to the Premier's office. So if departments are noticing emerging issues within their areas, we can feed that information up through the CCN chair directly to the Premier's department. So he is in touch with the community as required. So the CCN, that we have the State Disaster Coordination Centre, and the Public Information Capability, which is run by Chrissy's team and led by QPS, that puts out whole of government messaging to all our stakeholders, whether it be local government or spokespeople. Then we have the CCN, which sits above that, which is just heads of communication. So we are focused on that single point of truth during a disaster. So if there's an emerging issue such as sandbagging that might come on, supermarket shelves was a big one that we had during Alfred, we can reach directly into those communities and provide them the messaging they need without them hearing the buzz or the fuzz that's coming from other areas of the state. So also having that network convened daily means that we know who to call at last minute should there need to be something addressed. So it's a really, really good networking situation we have here. And I'll pass over to Chrissy to just highlight a bit more some of those social media strategies. I know we don't have QRA here today, but they had a huge uptake to get ready during Alfred in particular, more than 20 million views on social media, which is actually extraordinary. So I'll pass over to Chrissy.
Good morning. Thank you, Penny. Yes, so during these activations, they're obviously very, very significant events, and our Media and Public Affairs group has a bit of a three-pronged approach when it comes to informing the public of critical incidents. So we obviously do traditional media, we got the DICE team, other social media that Penny touched on. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail on what each one of these areas does, or these capabilities. So when we activate, there's always a thirst from media for traditional media coverage. And so we always need to have a good strategy still in this place. So both Julian and Mark talked about this as part of their response to critical incidents. So we have a team that's based in Brisbane. We have also regional media officers who are also based in Townsville, Cairns, the Gold Coast. So we have them in those pivotal areas now where they can respond directly to any type of incident. They provide updated safety information to the public and community reassurance, as well as internal communications as well to our team. So during Tropical Cyclone Alfred, as obviously previously discussed, there was a huge media interest in this, and it started well before it even crossed the coast. So there was weeks of that thirst for new information before it even crossed the coastline. So in the lead up to and during the cyclone crossing, each of the media outlets then began upping the ante, if you like, with their covering of media. And that included TV, print, social media, and as well as the multitude of press conferences that we led. So you'll see that up there. And rather than going into details as well about the specifics, which is the public information capability, which again, Penny just mentioned. So obviously governed by CCN. Penny will generally let us know how many times a day that we need to be reporting, depending on the incident, and again, depending on how many incidents are happening at the one time. So again, as Penny mentioned, we had 3 activations this year where PIC was activated all 3 times, along with the other responsibilities of the Media and Public Affairs group to provide that pivotal information. So it's newly inherited. DPC used to run PIC up until now. So we've had a very, very good hit the ground running type 2025 to get our heads around public information capability. It is whole of government communicators led. So we do have a very robust roster and many different points of view to help us with the many different incidents that we're dealing with. And the next one is our DICE team, which has also been alluded to briefly. So along with the expectation of regular information for the media, always starts the conversation online, which again reflects on Julian's research. Mark and Sian also mentioned it. Everything from questions about finding, filling sandbags, to your vital warnings being received by entire communities, always online chatter. So our digital intelligence community engagement team, or our DICE team, they are our online specialists, and they engage with more than 1,000+ community groups that they're invited into to have that discussion with them directly, engaging with the community to address concerns and prevent that misinformation circulating that can become so problematic. So instead of having that one-way conversation with our online followers, we now have opened up a 2-way engagement process where we're actually talking with these people one-on-one. So it's a now very well-established group or team within the PIC capability. It's become extremely valuable this year, obviously, with the different activations, because it means that the team steps away from their usual duties and focuses on that main event to provide that sentiment reporting that's all too important to provide, which is based on intelligence-based reports to assist our QPS response and also to inform the general public and to inform our stakeholders as well. And working along our DICE team, next slide please, is also a social media team who, much like our media operations team, are stationed right around the state. So tapping into those regional media offices, tapping into DICE, social media is pretty much in all your feeds. You would have seen them somewhere. They're obviously very, very pivotal on Facebook. And as Nicola referred to earlier, that Facebook really grew for QPS during 2011 floods. We were already on Facebook, particularly making jokes, making dad jokes, we became very, very well known for. So there was already a good following there and became a very, very trusted source of truth. So when the 2011 floods happened and everybody was looking for that source of truth, the QPS Facebook was a pretty natural place to gravitate towards. The social media teams that know exactly which platform now, having grown from Facebook to feed into, with the ability to connect with the community on some easily searchable platforms as well. I know that we did talk about the fact that algorithms can be very, very pesky. However, there are still some hidden gems there. For example, TikTok, quite easily to search for critical information, which is an area that's always very, very important to us. And one of the safety posts on our TikTok, as you can see there, might have been Steve Carell who helped make that quite viral. But again, 33,000 likes there, which just shows how much more potential this platform holds, how social media strategies can really adopt accordingly to where your audience is and the sort of message that you're wanting to get out. So me, the DICE teams, our social media team, the media team, we all had a look at Julian's findings. We thought the findings and the recommendations were really relevant. And I think that we're implementing some of those findings already, but we will certainly be keeping an eye on Julian's work, and hopefully he will put TikTok and Reddit into the next research findings so that we can have a little bit more of a robust discussion about moving forward in this area. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you both, Chrissy and Penny, for that overview and for lifting the curtain, I suppose, in terms of what was happening in the background during not only this event, but as you said, the other events that were happening at the same time. We might have some questions. You've both subsequent presentations have touched on how you're already dealing with some of the issues that Julian found in his research. And we might get all of the panelists to turn on their cameras so that we can see you all. And I might just we'll have a look at the questions, because I think there's an interesting question here, straight up to Julian. If you could elaborate on what you mean by dark social spaces. Would you mind talking to that first, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry for that academic jargon. So typically, it's just an umbrella term because there's not a better one that includes all spaces in social media that are not directly public. So that can be a Facebook group, that can involve WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups, any sort of group structures. But there are other ones. For example, in TikTok, sometimes you have comment sections that are only visible to your friend group, for example, but not the public. That would also be a dark space.
And Mark, do you want to just comment on that? Because I think you said something interesting about how your mayors were, not your mayors, that your councillors were already linked into some of those community groups, and that's how you dealt with that at a local level?
Yeah, absolutely. We spent a deal of the off-season planning for that. So looking at emerging community groups and engaging with that. Some of our bigger groups across the Gold Coast are connected in as well with our media team. And probably the last piece to that is we have 8 isolated communities on the Gold Coast. It can become isolated very quick. So we've stood up community plans for each of them. So we actually reach straight into the community. Probably the most remote would be Springbrook up in our hinterland. They actually then on-forward the message either through their social media channel, which is trusted, or get a message out to meet at the community hall and get that message through.
That's great. That's great that that's already happening. And Penny and Chrissy, I suppose at the higher state level, you've got your social media teams across all of the different regions as well. Are they tapped into these dark social spaces within social media at all?
Yes, definitely. They would be monitoring, probably more our DICE team would be monitoring and keeping an eye on all those areas of social activity. So yes, concur with what Mark said.
Great.
And the huge benefit of that is QPS are then able to provide a summary of those concerns that are being raised in those spaces through to us. That can be fed through our departmental challenges, for example, how I said with supermarket shelves. So that is led by state development, our department. We can liaise with them about comm strategies moving forward. And then as a government with our channels, share that messaging on all of our respective platforms.
That's great. What a great system we've got in Queensland. I've just got to say that as a Queenslander. Sorry, that's my bias. I've got another question here for Mark, actually. You mentioned the public dashboard sits outside the local government website, but I missed who coordinates this channel. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Mark?
Yeah, sure. I probably didn't explain that properly. So it actually sits off our server. So we operate it out of the Local Disaster Coordination Centre. So it's hosted on a third-party server. So if we lose council systems, as long as we've got the internet, we we have access to it. It also exempts us from the normal publishing rules that should be in place for a good corporate website to allow us to balance most current information. So coordinated out of our disaster centre, but off the council network.
Thanks for that, Mark. Someone's actually asked, what hazards do council typically provide warnings for in Queensland? So we're talking about a Queensland jurisdiction. Mark, do you want to jump in on that one? Or Sian?
Yeah, Sian, what did you?
Yeah, not a problem. So local governments are the lead for floods, cyclones and severe weather. Local governments in Queensland generally rely on the BOM warnings for severe weather, but cyclones and floods, they absolutely will use their Australian warning system ones. They'll also anything that's emergent, so maybe a water contamination issue during a disaster, that sort of thing. Other than that, it'll be for fires, it will be Queensland Fire Department. Maritime Safety Queensland also issue those warnings for maritime spaces, harbours, Queensland Health for extreme heat, but local governments look at that cyclone, landslides, anything else that isn't captured, really.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Shanji. We've got a lot of questions. This is wonderful, a really engaged audience. I might go to Penny with this one. This is asking about backward information feeding. Has the social media information ever been used for creating situational awareness for responder agencies?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I would say it's more Chrissy's element in terms of the DICE capacity, and I'll let her speak to that as well. But certainly, if you're talking about emergent situations that are happening currently, people do tend to go to social media. Unfortunately, we do have cases where instead of dialing 000 or calling the SES, they will go to social media instead. And that raises a concern, I guess, in terms of our monitoring capabilities and how we respond to those. So there have been incidents of response through social media where people have posted things, but I think that's a testament to the work that Queensland Police Service does in monitoring those challenges and providing a timely response. If Chrissy wants to elaborate further.
I think you were pretty much spot on there, Penny. But yeah, that's right. It's exactly what our DICE team does. That's exactly what this, not just the sentiment reporting is about, but also making sure that people know how to report what's going on, whether it's crime, whether it's a significant event like TC Alfred. It's important that we're part of the conversation, and the DICE team is very, very good at that. They are welcomed into community groups. And they can have that conversation at that ground level, directing people where to get a sandbag, directing people where an evacuation centre is, whatever the question might be. It is that two-way engagement that's really, really important. So we do love the fact that they pull these reports together for us so that it's also intelligence-driven for our police officers, so they know exactly where to go. They know exactly where people feel like they may be feeling a little neglected, for example, when it just isn't the case. So we can always send people to them as well, if that's a situation where they're needing assistance. It's excellent for us because we don't always know where people need to be, where officers need to be. So if the community is telling us, that's intelligence led, and that's brilliant.
That's great. So you're tapping straight into community need, which is wonderful. Yeah. What sort of digital platforms does your DICE team use to collaborate and communicate with those community groups? Is it a range of different?
It's a range, yes. They're pretty much everywhere. We're our social media team. We're on most platforms that you'll find at our DICE team as well. But we're invited, of course, into community groups. You find them primarily on Facebook because that's where a lot of the conversation happens. But they certainly will branch out into wherever the conversation is happening, whether it's TikTok or whether it's bits and pieces of conversations or photographs, for example, of damage, for example, on Instagram. So every platform plays a role.
And I imagine all of those teams that you've got in those different functional areas, Chrissy, would be supported with policy and standard operating procedures, that support them in their work, so that they're working in an approved context within that space. Yes,
absolutely, and a very legal one. Yes, of course, very, very important for everyone to be following processes, not just for the DICE team, but for all public information, right through from the media team to the PIC to DICE. We follow very, very clear guidelines for collecting information and storing information. Yes.
Yeah. So there was a question there about policy for social media interaction for staff. So Queensland Police Service has been doing this for a long time and would be very well versed in having such supportive policy sitting around those respective teams. We've got an interesting question here. Nobody's come up with a response to it yet in our chat. So I'm just going to throw it out there for anybody to answer for our panel. So Glenn from ABC Emergency has asked, ahead of TC Alfred, the ABC found evidence that search results in Facebook or Meta for posts using terms on Cyclone Alfred were blocked. In Canada, there's been a news ban in effect on Facebook for the past 2 years, and so people are potentially missing important public safety information. Are members of the panel concerned about this becoming an issue locally in the future on social media platforms? And is there a plan B if this starts happening in Australia? Does anybody want to touch on that at all?
I can quickly comment if you like, and then someone else can add something. But yeah, this actually happened. We saw that too, and it is something that is typically referred to a disaster preparedness paradox. So the stronger you get in some sort of capacity, if then that breaks away, you'll get more vulnerable in return. So what I think is a really great initiative is building capacity outside of platforms, like the dashboard that we've seen, where you can quickly prompt communities and Australians too, and sort of diversifying. So not relying on one platform is actually a good thing. What I mentioned before, that we're not, all on Twitter or not all on Facebook. So yeah, and just keeping in mind that these platforms, they switch a button and everything goes downhill from there. So yeah, building digital infrastructure and resources away from the platforms that is then easily accessible. That's the best way to go.
Thank you, Julian. Does anybody else want to comment? We're quickly running out of time. I've just seen what the time is, so we've got 1 minute left. But
sorry.
Yeah, please, Sian.
Just to echo what Julian says, is there's no single simple warning or public information approach, and it's that multi-pronged approach that Julian's absolutely touched on. And we see it's door knocking, it's community groups, it's those informal and formal networks, it's sirens, it's everything that goes with it, and it's absolutely a concern. But it's making sure that we have that robustness and that engagement before that high risk severe weather season is a key part.
That's great. Thank you, Sian. Look, everybody, this has been an awesome panel session, and I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Julian, Mark, Sian, Penny and Chrissy, who've taken the time to join us today and share their work and reflections from TC Alfred and beyond. And a big thanks to everyone who joined us online and for submitting these wonderful questions for the panel to discuss. We need a longer time frame for webinars of this nature, I think. Just to let you know, the recording of the webinar will be online next week, and you'll all receive an email with the link and a link to the associated presentations. We've put a link into Julian's report already, so please go ahead and help yourself to that offering. Our next hazardous webinar will be on the 19th of August, and it's titled Natural Hazards and Resilience in Complex Urban Systems, where we'll all discuss our research with the project team from RMIT and a special guest from the City of Sydney's Resilient Sydney program. We're also planning a special research lessons from the Texas flood webinar with details to follow soon. And for updates, everything Natural Hazards Research Australia, please sign up to our newsletter and follow us on social media. Once again, a big thank you to all of our panelists today for sharing everything that you've shared with this audience. And thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.